today is a chap I've known of for quite a long time. Never really met him. We met him very briefly at Cliff Fest at Cliff College a couple of weekends ago. So hello to you, Rob.
Hello, how are you?
Do you know, I'm not too bad. I've run out of water, but the team will bring me one, which is really good. Apart from that, it's a bit humid. Is it muggy where you are? It's a bit close.
Yeah, it's just started raining, so it's kind of clearing the air a little bit.
That's always a good thing. Now, if I paint a picture of what I can see behind you for folk who are listening, you can watch this later when it goes onto YouTube in the next week or two. But just over Rob's left-hand shoulder, there is a very beautiful collection of guitars. Now, I confess I am not a guitarist. I am a keyboard player first and last, but even I can appreciate guitars. Can you talk us through? Because I can see definitely a lovely acoustic. There's an electric one, and there's a little smaller one. Is that a mandolin behind there?
This one that's stuck behind is that's just a little mando that I use sometimes when I'm recording. This is a Les Paul. It's called Ollie. I've got 15 guitars, I think, and they've all got names. So this is Ollie, my Les Paul. That's a Takamine nylon string. Cool tube nylon string, and that's Nancy. And the one at the end is a new acquisition, actually, brand new, and he got it at the weekend. It's a D'Angelico, which is New York sort of based semi-acoustic kind of hollow body electric, really lovely guitar.
I have
not christened yet, not christened.
Well, you see, now that needs to be done. But I was going to say, where do the names come from? Because I love the fact you name them, but where do the names come from?
They're normally like connections that I've had with different people over the years, you know, that kind of stuff. So I mean, one of the suggestions for the D'Angelico is Tina, which will be after my mum. So that's on the short list.
Oh, okay, but I see that. Would that increase your emotive creativity, or would it make it more? I mean, where would that help or not help?
Makes it really hard to sell them.
Well, yeah, it's like a tattoo. You can't sell your tattoo, but guitars are personalized, and I know that very much.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to get. I do only get guitars if I need a particular thing. So all my guitars are very different. And that's normally for recording and stuff. So I normally take about 4 on the road with me because I use different tunings. So
I love a guitar, but I can never play one. I'll tell you why, because I never had the fingers for it, because I know you have to get the little sort of the ridgeline callus thing. And even though I tried one time, I just thought, but if I play a keyboard, it doesn't hurt. If I play a guitar, at some point it's going to hurt, and then it gets really good. And I don't have the patience to get through the pain bit.
Yeah.
So acoustic, electric, very, very different feels. Do you have something that you prefer to do? Do you prefer the acoustic style, or do you prefer the electric, or are you just a man of the moment?
Well, I suppose I would normally play acoustic just because I'm a solo singer-songwriter and it's the easiest, most versatile thing to take with me. But like at Cliff, most of the time, apart from the gig I did in the evening, I was playing electric. So yeah, and I love. I'm not a lead guitarist. I'm a strummer. So yeah.
See, now strummers are important because it's a bit like the drums. The strummer keeps the rhythm, and it's really important because it fills all the sound out really lovely.
Yeah. There is an art that I've learned over the years listening to some of my older stuff. There is I don't know. Strumming is not as straightforward as you think. It's it's very underestimated. I think it's one of the hardest things when people are learning to play the guitar. The chords fairly easy, but it's getting that strumming that can be the tricky thing.
Yeah, because it's not just a question of your hand going up and down against the strings. It's I mean, yes, in theory, that's kind of the basic. And there's the how hard do you want to hit one note as opposed to the other. It's quite a fine process. I don't play guitar, but I do appreciate that, and I appreciate the skill of a good guitarist too.
Yeah, there you go.
Now, music. So you're a singer-songwriter.
Yeah.
Where would you put yourself? Are you not in a box, which I'm very, very much in favor of, or would you sort of be boxed as a rock acoustic folk? Where would you like to be or not be?
I find it really hard to put myself in a thing because I change with it's the job. I've been doing this for 25 years as a job. So the tour that I'm doing at the moment is my 25th anniversary thing. And over those 25 years, I've gone from rock to folk to sort of more poppy, more country, so there is a whole kind of wide thing. I did a Paul Gambaccini. He said I did an interview with him on Radio 2 years ago, and he said, "Oh, you're a bit like Bruce Springsteen having English tea with Billy Bragg." So I'll take that. That'll do.
That's an interesting description. A lot of respect for Paul Gambaccini. I love the way he interviews. So let's go back in time to music then. What was your first guitar? You've got one or two now. What was your first guitar? How did that end up in your hands?
I was when I was about 11 years old. I was involved in a car accident. I got knocked off my bike, and I really smashed up my leg quite badly, and I was in hospital, and it was just really boring. So my mum bought me a battered old nylon string guitar and the Complete Guitar Player Book One, which taught you three chords, which is all you needed. And so I don't think my mum was particularly popular with the nurses, but yeah, yeah. So I did that, and then when I came out of hospital, I got into quite a lot of trouble when I was a teenager, and was one of these kids that got taken out of class and put in the special room for kids that didn't get on in class. And that room at the hospital, sorry, at school was the music room. And so there was a group of us in there, and we formed a band. So that was it, three chords, four lads, three chords, bashing away badly. We were called the Freak Brothers.
But it's a beginning. You've got to start somewhere.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. Absolutely.
You see, now I've got a theory about a lot of the lads who don't do well in school. I've had this chat with doctors and other folk as well. And I think a lot of folk, when they struggle in school, I think it's perhaps more boys than girls, because I think girls are so much more, I think school's much more designed for female than it is for male. And I think blokes, some of the time, not all the time, I think some of the guys, it's not so much they're bored or frustrated. It's just, they don't want to do it.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So much of it, of the sort of the naughty behavior. Do you know, I really don't think it is. I just think it's an environment where they really don't fit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it was just. I think before I went into hospital, I was fine, and then I was out. I was out of school for nearly a year, and so going back in, I'd had a year of kind of getting away. Although I was in hospital and I was in bed with my leg hoisted up in the air in a traction, I get away with all sorts, and people running around after you. So suddenly coming back into a place like school where you had to sort of get on with stuff and do stuff. I think it was a bit, maybe I'll look back and say it was badly managed or I was badly handled. I don't know, but I just got in with the wrong crowd. The wrong crowd got in with me.
Quote earlier by Bear Grylls, which I think is really good. And he was talking about some of the greatest sort of academics that he's met. Their lives haven't been that good, but some of the people he's met who haven't been great in school go on to do really great things. I think it's a bit simplified statement, of course it is, but I think there's a lot of truth in that we think that somehow if we can do really well in school, that's it for life. Yeah. But the school can't prepare you for life. It can prepare you for exams, which hopefully will give you some sort of underpinning for wherever you go in life. But life is a lot more than what you can get taught in a school.
Yeah, 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 yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely.
Because you won't be taught to buy 15 guitars, but I think that's a really good way of, looking after the environment, caring for the wood.
There you go. There you go. Absolutely. Absolutely. They're investments. That's what I keep saying.
Yeah, I just keep saying it. It's like bicycles for some folks, or mountain bikes and races. Anyway, come back to the music. So you had your band in school. You were doing something. Where was your first gig? And you thought, I can actually do this. This could be a bit of fun.
That's really funny because this weekend, this weekend I went. I live in Coventry now, right in the middle of England, and my mum still lives down in Worthing, which is where I grew up. And we got tickets to go. She got some tickets to go and see Wet, Wet, Wet in concert. And I've worked with the guys from Wet 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 and know Graham really well, the guitarist, and so we went down, and it was really strange because where they did their gig in the Pavilion Theatre in Worthing was that where I did my first ever gig with that band, and I haven't been back there since. So it was a really strange thing going in this this venue after, gosh, nearly 40 years, well, 40 years or so, yeah. So yeah, that was it. And so that's where it was, yeah.
That's
And
pretty cool.
it was actually a talent contest, and we didn't win. I mean, we were a pretty bad punk band in Worthing, which is capital of, I call it the capital of old age pensions and bifocal shop windows.
That's probably sums up Worthing quite well. So you had the gig, but I mean, where did music then go from there? Because obviously that was in school. A lot of the stuff that starts in school may not make it much further than that. How far
No,
is that band?
yeah, I mean, we did it. We were just mucking around with it really, and did a couple of things, but then I was getting into a lot more trouble at that point, and ended up when I was 15 living on the streets. Um, and then and then in the squat, and then kind of on the run from the police for all sorts of things. It was a real mess, you know. Um, and when as things got worse, me and my mate, we decided to leave Worthing and get out of Worthing as quickly as we can. And so well, first of all, we bought a car for 60 quid between us, which lasted all of 12 miles. And then we just carried on walking, and we walked north until we ended up in Northampton, bumped into some Christians there who were giving out some food and all of that kind, food and drink, and look, basically, yeah, I don't know, they were having some kind of outreach thing. And they offered me somewhere to stay. And it was in that environment, kind of hanging around with them, that I started getting back into music. Being a punk, trying to sort of, I don't know, be involved in what they were doing was really quite interesting. But yeah, so that was how that whole music side developed from there. Yeah. Ended up in the church band after a few years. We did lots of big conferences. We played at Wembley. That was probably the biggest place. So yeah, but it was all conference kind of stuff.
So music then obviously took a bit of a detour, I suppose you might say, from your punk
Yeah.
band from school into conferences. How did the music develop from there? I want to come back to some of the live stuff, but I'm just sort of want to track some of the music stuff to where you are today.
Yeah, so I was really frustrated. I loved, I was doing the Christian thing. I was learning what it was to be a follower of Jesus and everything, but I just thought the music was really rubbish. And so I started exploring and digging out sort of bands and discovering all of that kind of stuff, and started writing my own stuff I wanted to write stuff that would talk about my, I don't know, it would talk about life from my perspective, not necessarily, I don't know, not necessarily as a they weren't necessarily sort of Christian songs and that kind of stuff. I did write songs for church, but I just wanted to write normal songs that would come at things from a bit of a different angle, a different perspective to what they would normally, you know. Always, as as a Christian or somebody that's trying to do that anyway, it's for me, it's like I don't like being called a Christian singer. I'm a singer and I'm a Christian, and that's for me, that's quite different. And so that's where that went. And I guess late 90s we formed. There's a few of us formed a band called Goldsmiths, and recorded an album called I Know You Know, which was quite Britpoppy, I suppose. It was around that sort of time when lots of that sort of thing was happening, real guitar driven stuff. So yeah, we did that for a bit, and and it was a guy called Mike Rimmer, um, who was a really who became a very good friend of ours. He used to work for Cross Rhythms and UCB Radio. He said you should try doing something on your own. Just do a Billy Bragg thing, and so he got me my first sort of solo gig, which was interesting. I was, but that it sowed the seed to what I do now, I think. And so I was just toying with that, and it was a bit of a hobby. I had a, I'd done all right. I got a real job and all that kind of stuff. But then, um, in 2001, my mum and dad had split up when I was very young. My dad had moved to America, and he'd got a very good job. He was on the board of directors of this big insurance company, and his office was on the 99th floor of the World Trade Center. And he was killed on September the 11th. And that was the catalyst for me to think, really sort of take stock of where I was and what I wanted to do. And I felt like I had something to say, and the way that could say it was through music. So I chucked in what I was doing work-wise, and that's when the whole kind of um, yeah, going it alone as a full-time musician kind of started. So yeah,
I'm so sorry for your loss. It was an horrendous day. I think for some folk, it's just, some of that happened in the past. For me, I remember exactly where I was. I watched it on TV,
yeah,
and I remember standing. We were in Spain. We are about to fly home 2 days later, and I remember, like so many of the people, you remember the moment because I remember standing in Spain, and my wife came out and said, "Why are you watching the TV? We're in Spain." And I said, "But look at the TV." And it's one of those unreal moments that for me is
yeah,
very much a part of my present because I watched it happening.
yeah,
And it changed a lot of people's perspectives on what was safe, what was not, and all that kind of stuff. And it's still to this day, it's not just a thing in the past. This is everybody's present still.
yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, and this is why the tour that I'm doing at the moment is my 25th anniversary tour, because that was 25 years ago this year. And so what's quite interesting is, especially places like Cliff, when I play there, I mean, half of the audience hasn't been born
Yeah.
when that happened. And yet it can be so still very immediate and very sort of close, I suppose. So, so yeah, I know. It was one of those things when it happened. I thought you could see where things were going to go with it, um, just in terms of retaliation, all of that kind of stuff. And I just thought, I've got something to say about this. Um, you know, for me, it was kind of, there were all the challenges about as a Christian, how do you respond to that? Um, and yeah, so that's what I did.
But for you, it began something of a journey that you're still on, and this is one of my privilege. I say that very loosely, but and carefully, but it's one of the things I am so privileged to see people who something bad happens. I mean, COVID is perhaps more recent for more people,
Yeah,
and yet so many people went through COVID, and it was a terrible time. But I've spoken to so many people for whom COVID was such a good, positive time because out of the terrible stuff that was going on, it bore something new. They'd lost their job, so let's try something that I would never have dreamed of. And
yeah,
sometimes
yeah,
really hard, terrible things that we have to endure. Yes, there, like you say, there's what's the response? How am I supposed to respond to this? I don't think there is how am I supposed to. There is respond to it as you're able to and process it the best you can. But for so many other folk, actually, it can be the start of something good. And if ever there's a redemptive story and Christianity, you bring it in, it's like, well, something terrible happened in 9/11 or the tube bombings. I remember where I was for that day as well. And
yeah,
all these terrible moments, but although they are terrible, they can be the start of something good. And that's the bit of redemption that I don't understand. It's a
yeah.
God that I'm never going to comprehend. All I know is that I spoke to enough people that something bad happens, and do you know what? Something good actually can come out of that, which I don't. As I say, I don't understand it. I've just seen it.
Yeah, I have. I think since probably since almost day one of doing this, my whole kind of, I don't know, call it a mantra or a motto, is that love is bigger, and that's always the theme over the last 25 years in some way of what I do. And each tour has that as the thing, and it is about that. It's about, okay, we live in a messed up world. What can we do? What can we say? How can we respond? Can we be bigger than the mess that's in this world? And I think whether whether you're a person of faith or not, it's 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 absolutely relevant. So yeah, I mean, yeah. I just think light is bigger than darkness.
Do you know, I remember, I've shared this one before and I don't care. I remember someone doing a talk about light versus darkness, and they talked about this cardboard box. And they said, if you look in that cardboard box, there's a torch, but you can't see the torch because the cardboard box, the walls are thick enough. We've taped it up just enough. You can't see the light, but you don't need a massive hole to see the light. And they put a pinprick in the hole in the box, and the light started to shine through. And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
the point of, you don't need to have a lot of light or a massive gaping hole. You just need something tiny. And you know what? The light always wins. And in this darkened church, which is what they'd set up, it was phenomenal to think it doesn't take a lot, but it always wins.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah.
Object lessons, they stick in my head sometimes. That was one of them. And I want to come
I like
back
that.
to some of your live stuff, but just into the music, because one of the things you said is really important to us, because we are a radio station that plays music. That's all we ever say. We never try to differentiate. And that's a really important part for me, because when I set it up, I thought, well, I don't want to play Christian music or non-Christian music, because you're making a distinction that I don't want to make. My music collection is not Christian CDs, non-Christian CDs, not quite sure CDs. I have a music collection. It's quite a good one, but it's music. And some of it I sometimes, some of it I don't want to listen to. And other times stuff I don't want to listen to, I might want to listen to, because it's all music. Why do you want to see yourself as a musician who happens to be a Christian rather than being labeled as a Christian musician? What's the importance of the distinction?
I think so. I often get asked about my faith. When did you become a Christian? All that kind of stuff, and I find it really difficult to pinpoint a moment. I didn't have one of these Damascus Road thunderbolt kind of flash of lightning kind of things. And more than talking about being a Christian, I talk about what it is to be a follower of Jesus. Just because, and it's because that for me describes my journey. I'm still learning what it is. And sometimes I really mess that up, and sometimes it's fine. As I don't know. Um, and I think the idea of being a Christian musician sort of says, okay, every song that I put out has to have um, has to mention Jesus or God. It has to, it has to have all of those. It's formulaic. Whereas I just want to sing about life, and I'm singing about life from a Christian perspective, or the perspective of somebody that is struggling to walk this road, and to find out how to do it better. Um, and it's songs that sometimes they're full of doubt, depending on where I'm at. I think God's fine with doubt. I think there's an honesty. Um, um, and I think quite often if you talk about Christian music and the way that's put out, it can be, not all the time, but sometimes it can be quite dishonest, because we're building up something that we're struggling to believe ourselves. And I think God has space, if you like, to sort of to listen to our doubts. And there's a guy in the Bible who talks to Jesus. He says, "God, Lord, I believe, help me in my unbelief." And he's one of my heroes, because I do believe, but actually I'm having a real problem here. So I just need a bit of help. This is where I'm at. And so when I put my songs out there, it's kind of, look, this is where I'm at. This is what I see. Yeah.
I definitely get that. I remember an interview with Lecrae from the States who does hip hop, and he
Yeah,
was,
yeah,
I'm not a Christian hip hop guy. I'm a hip hop guy,
yeah.
and I happen to be a person of faith. Um, but if I was a Christian hip hop guy, I wouldn't get to go anywhere. As a hip hop guy who's good at what he does, I get to go to all sorts of places, and I can be a Christian.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to go if I was a Christian hip hop guy. And I remember watching the interview and thinking, that felt, this is quite a few years ago now, before we started the radio. And it's one of those interviews that really stuck in me because it was remembering of when I was, I mean, maybe when I definitely recognize some of what you were saying. I remember some of the worship music. I, I just wanted to stab my ears with anything to get rid of it because it was so bad. It came on a cassette tape, which dates it, or even a vinyl. And it was so dreadful. And I remember thinking as a young guy who was just starting to play music and stuff, if this is the best that we can produce, I don't know that I want a part of this because
Mm,
there's no joy, there's no excellence, there's no gifting, there's no talent, there's
mm.
no skill. And you look around at the bands at the time, Bon Jovi and Def Leppard who are putting out really high quality, excellent music. And we've got a cassette tape with an out of tune singer and a recorder and the
Mm.
guitar that maybe should have been tuned a year ago.
Yeah.
And I just think this is the best that we can do. It
Mm.
can't be the best. Now we've got other bands that came about. Heartbeat at the time was revolutionizing the church with modern style music.
Heartbeat.
Like Heartbeat, Sue Rinaldi.
Oh yeah, yeah. I did. I did. My first album was Dave Bankhead from Heartbeat produced my first album.
There you go. You see, I do go back a little while.
There you go. Wow.
But I just remember thinking, well, this is different. This isn't dreary and drudgy and horrible. I actually love hymns, by the way. I managed to freak out quite a few people. I really love traditional hymns, and I really love the most kind of contemporary songs that are around, and I'm quite happy with that. And most people think, well, you shouldn't like hymns if you like this, and yeah, but it's good music. I like good music
Yeah.
that's got a reason to be.
Yeah.
And I think that's the important thing. That was what I got from Lecrae interview many years ago. And similar to what you're saying, it's about being honest to who you are in your musical expression,
Yeah.
rather than I'm a Christian musician. Like you say, it then pigeonholes you. Lauren Daigle right now, she's struggling, I think, in some ways to be, well, she's a Christian artist, but she's trying not to be just Christian. And it's all these bits that don't quite mash together because there's a box that we want to stick people in, which is why I love people like you who are not trying to just stick inside a little box.
Yeah. 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 What it does mean, it means that um, if you do this kind of thing like this, you can struggle to work out where exactly you fit. If you're not quite Christian enough to be in that Christian world, and if you're not quite folky enough to be in the folk world, and if you're not, and sometimes that can get quite frustrating. But most of the time, I'm really glad. When I started, I recorded, like I say, Dave Bankhead was one of the producers on the album, with a guy called Simon Goodall, and we had some of Delirious as musicians, and so it was a cracking sort of album the way it was produced, and I sent it out and hoped to get signed and all of that kind of stuff, and didn't hear anything back, and when you start, that's what you do. This is what you want to do. You want to push your stuff. You want it to get heard and everything. And I recorded an album in New York, with an Emmy-winning producer that a friend of ours had put us in touch with, and I thought, yes, this is going to do it now, and it didn't. I managed to get a live session on Radio 2 and did that in Broadcasting House in London, and I, again, I thought, this is it. It's gone out. Everybody's going to have heard it. I'm going to, this is going to, wow, it's going to rock it. And every time, I don't know, it kind of comes back and nothing happens. But in hindsight, I'm really grateful. 25 years later, I'm still doing this as a job. And I sometimes talk about this, not to boast about it, but when your songs have been used as in weddings and walking people down the aisle, when they've been used in funerals. One of my songs has been inscribed on somebody's gravestone. One of my songs is somebody's got it tattooed on their arm. And you think, which I do find a little bit creepy, but hey, but you know the flip side of that is realizing the impact that these songs have had. And okay, it hasn't been, a global phenomena or anything. It's just these small little things. And it's a little bit like we were talking about the light. For me, it's those chinks of light that have made all the difference in people's lives. So yeah.
I remember one of my favorite bands, a band called Magnum. Most people have never heard of them. They made it a bit bigger in the US. But as a kid, I loved them. I saw them a couple of times. The Wolfront Hall in Wolverhampton, which was quite a
Yeah.
big, popular venue. Not big, but it was a very popular venue with lots of big bands randomly come into this quite small hall. And I remember them talking about how they loved doing the small gigs. Then you start to see some of the other really big bands do, 50, 100,000 people crowds. And they said, but we miss the connection with a few.
Yeah.
Because great, we've got records and all that, and we've got this huge football stadium filled, but we're not actually meeting anybody, or if we are, it's like 0.1%.
Yeah. Yeah.
They miss some of that connection, and I think that's where people matter. I always say, do one reader at a time, one listener at a time. We're not trying to change the world. If I can make one person's day better, I feel like I've won, and I feel like I can sleep tonight, and I think. Maybe it comes with wisdom. We're a bit older. And I think there is a little bit of wisdom in not trying to change the entire world. Because you're young, aren't you? 18, 20, 25, we're going to change the world, and you realize you can't and you get depressed. But actually, we can change the world, but we can change one person's world and another person's world. And if we do that, the world does become better.
Yeah. It's one of my songs.
There you are, you see?
There you go.
Accidental. I haven't looked it up. I really haven't. Now, I want to go back into life, not so much when you become a Christian. I don't do that one. But how did faith become more meaningful for you? Because similar to you, I don't have this, big ball of light dropping out of the sky thing. My wife did, actually. She has a really, really Paul on the road to Damascus experience. I didn't have that. I was brought up in church. She was not. She was in her 20s. I was sort of 6, 7 when I thought, I want to do this. Yeah. So what was your faith journey growing up, and when did faith become more important to you?
I think meeting these Christians when I was on the streets obviously sowed a seed and planted something. For about 10 years, it was all about the acceptance. It was all about I was part of something. And, I absolutely did experience the love of God, experience, I don't know, the Holy Spirit and all of that bit by bit. But I think the profound moment was a couple of days after 9/11, because I had gone to Coventry Cathedral, I live in Coventry, as I said, and Coventry was almost destroyed in the war, in the Blitz. And there's the old cathedral there. It's just the ruins. So all you've got is the walls are on the side, and you've got the tower. But it's become a centre of reconciliation. It's the whole story of Coventry Cathedral is incredible. The guy, the provost at the time was a guy called it was the Reverend Dick Howard, and he was in the days that followed the Blitz, he just talked constantly about forgiveness and reconciliation, and the words "Father, forgive" were inscribed on the cathedral wall. I went down to the cathedral, saw that. I just went down there to get some space. I saw that, had a huge kind of, I guess, an argument with God. I just thought, what on earth, you want me to forgive? I've just seen my dad killed on TV, and you want me to do that? And I started having all these, if there's a God, how come all this rubbish happens? All of that kind of thing. And I remember you sort of realize, it's so easy for us to talk about all of, oh yeah, you've got to forgive, turn the other cheek, pray for your enemies, all of that kind of stuff. For me, that's when the rubber hit the road. And I couldn't just switch off believing in God just because somebody had chosen to prove there's a bit of hatred in the world by flying planes into buildings. And so then it was like, okay, so why, why is this sort of thing happening? Is God actually a good God, or is he just malevolent, or does he just not care? Um, and I couldn't, my, I couldn't stop. Well, I couldn't I couldn't believe that God was anything other than good, and that rather than sitting aside, he does. When we go through this stuff, the world is just a mess. So I guess the question was then, okay, is God good? Does he love us? Does he walk with us through this? And I think, yeah, absolutely. If we choose to allow him, God walks with us through that. And so, and this is where it gets onto that love is bigger thing, because if God is good, is that goodness, is this God that I have just chosen to walk with and to allow to walk with me through this pain, is he bigger? And yeah, absolutely. And that was probably the most profound moment I've had, that sort of said, right, okay, this is real. This is how it is. And it's those decisions, I suppose, the decision to believe and the decision to sort of allow God in has, yeah, I've just seen again and again, sort of, as I've sort of journeyed this road since 9/11, seeing God kind of change me, dig up things that are, pretty unsavory in my own life, and help me deal with those, look, and this whole kind of music thing, it's a bit of a dream really that I get to do it. And I'm always questioning, is this the right thing to do? And when I do that, things come up, and so yeah. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of my.
No, I think it does, because different people have different ways of encountering who God is.
Yeah.
It's God, but the journey to him can be quite radically different. So, say my wife was in her 20s. She was at university in France, and she went through some really dark stuff. And it was a Paul on the road to Damascus. There were Brian
Yeah.
and all that. For me, I was brought up in a church situation, so the church scene was normal. That's just what I did every Sunday, probably 3 times on a Sunday and a few times in a week. And there was youth group, and we went to church, and that's what you did. So for me, it was already kind of ingrained as a part of who I am. Yes, I made a decision at 7. This is the way I want to go. But it was almost semi-normalized for me. I could already praying pretty well, and I could, quite a bit of scripture probably. It didn't mean anything to me, but I could say the words. And then over time, as you continually make that decision to walk and become more like Jesus, the more you discover that, yeah, I think I made a good call, and the closer the journey can become. But it is a journey. It's not a destination. I've said this a while back, but there was a girl I met, and she came to church one Christingle. There's a big, she wasn't cathedral, but it looked like one, a big old Anglican church.
Yeah.
And it was a Christingle, and this was like a nearly 1,000-year-old church, enormous. There were candles, and there was brass, and there was all this lovely candlelight, and she had an encounter of God. But that was all she ever had. And then years later, she talked about the encounter of God, but she never chose to do anything with that. She was sort of stuck in this. Well, I met God one night. Okay, but what happened? Well, nothing. But it was good that night, wasn't it? Well, yes, but what's happened in your life since? And the thing is, we can have those encounters, but they actually need to become something.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it becomes a memory that starts to fade, which is why we need that ongoing daily journey.
Yeah.
In terms of where you are now, I mean, I've been to Coventry Cathedral. I was grew up in Wolverhampton, so I mean, Coventry Cathedral is like the school trip that everybody did.
That's right. Yeah.
It's quite big. You see the stained glass windows, and you see the bits of broken building and all the rest of it, and it means nothing, to be honest, to a 13-year-old kid. I was like, yeah, great, okay, when am I going home? Where's my lunch? It doesn't mean anything to you, because it's so. I think because the idea of the war is so much bigger than anything my brain could kind of compute or process. It's just irrelevant. You've got a bit of sadness, but yeah, well, that's bad. Where's my lunch? And the thing is, it's not till you get a bit older you start to sort of think through things a bit better, and you have a better way of processing stuff. But we've all got those really, really tough times. I've got a childhood that's not what I want to think about. You've got that experience amongst others, but it does define something of who we are. It doesn't define who we're going to be, but it definitely defines a part of who we are. That moment when you heard about your dad, that's going to be a life defining moment. Doesn't make who you are for the rest of your life, because you then had to go through that journey of, do I want to forgive? What does that look like, and how do I do that?
Yeah.
How long do you think it took you to get to the point where you could say, without bitterness, anger, and hatred, which I'm guessing would have been there from the start, possibly, maybe not. But how long did that take as a journey when you could actually think about it without the anger winning, or did it not?
No, I just think it's like I say, it's a journey. I think one of the things that really that was interesting in the months that kind of followed the whole when it all happened, 9/11 happened, was there was this Father Forgive, um and so that was the challenge. But then I wanted to do like a memorial concert, a fundraising memorial concert, because I wanted to do something. And I'd written a couple of songs, and I worked at the time. I worked for a big company who had a charitable arm that would, and part of that, when these big companies, they kind of work with the employees on anything that they're doing fundraising. It's their way of looking good, I suppose. And I went to see the lady who ran that charitable bit, and I decided that I wanted to raise money for the British Red Cross Afghan appeal, because America had done Operation Enduring Freedom. They were rounding up Afghanis, and kids were kind of being left behind. And, there was a real crisis going on. And I thought, this is just wrong. We've got to look after these kids. And I remember going into the office and telling this lady what what I was raising money for. She expected that I'd be raising money for victims of, families, victims. And she said to me, when I said it was Afghanistan, she said, Afghanistan, that's where they breed terrorists. She said, the sooner that place is blown off the face of the earth, the better. And I had quite a heated talk with her and walked out. And then the church that I was part of, they weren't very supportive either. They weren't supportive of me doing music. Music was supposed to be for the church and not for standing on stage and being a rock star and all that kind of thing. And so they weren't supportive, and that was really tricky. And they were quite nasty to me when I carried on doing it. And I remember going to the cathedral again, to the ruins, because it was my quiet space, and sort of shouting at God, and then shouting at my dad, because my dad, when I was growing up, he wasn't around. He's part of the reason I got into trouble, I think, because he wasn't there. And when he heard that I'd sort of joined this church, he sort of was kind of saying, "Oh, be careful, it might be a cult," and all this kind of stuff. And I remember having this shouting match, and just saying to him, "You told me, you told me this, but you weren't there." And I suddenly realized that this forgiveness thing, forgiving these people that have flown planes into the building, kind of almost seemed easier than forgiving people that were close to me and that I should have, been able to lean on and count on. And then forgiving myself as well, just for the mess that I've made with my life. So it was the whole forgiveness thing was really, and it still is quite a journey, and yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
But that life is a journey. I said this earlier. It's not a destination. Life is the journey. It's for living, and life can be really, really hard. And sometimes the hard bits actually become some of the better bits. Not pleasant. But what's this story? I remember reading something about somebody who they'd broken their leg. They want to play basketball and they've broken their leg.
Yeah.
And they're really angry. Their family rang angry at God. How am I supposed to play basketball if I can't jump on my leg? And so they had to walk around for ages while their leg was broken, jumping around on the other leg. Well, of course, that jumping on the other leg strengthened that leg quite a lot. And when
Mm.
they actually got the leg working, they discovered they could really jump better than they ever could have done.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Tragedy of breaking their leg and all the problems of that, all of a sudden they could do the one thing they always wanted to do. Now they could with a different leg. And I
Mm.
just think it's such a powerful allegory of, sometimes the stuff that goes wrong, it's not great. It's not good. You
No.
can't good bad. Sorry, bad to good. If it's bad, it's bad. But the redemption thing, I said right at the start, that's the bit that I don't get about what God can do, where he can take a broken
Yeah,
leg
yeah.
to something good and take the bad of 9/11, but turn it into something good in terms of the music. And I would be quite confident, having not met any of your listeners, your fans, or whatever, they're going to enjoy the music because it's going to speak to them because it's speaking of something real in your own life.
Yeah, 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 and absolutely, and we all go. This thing I'm doing at the moment, the tour. It's called "How Did We Get Here?" And um, one of my, I don't know, call it a disclaimer. I don't know, but I have a life where there are big headlines. I lived on the streets, I don't know, and I lost my dad in the terrorist attack, 9/11, all of that kind of stuff. I suffered various bits of sort of, I don't know, abuse and stuff in the church. Um, and I'm still here. And so they're big, they can be big headlines. And yet, and when I first, back in the 80s, I remember the books, the go-to books, if you wanted to read a great book, Christian book, it was Run Baby Run and The Cross and the Switchblade. And I remember on the back of those, there was the negative side of that was you felt that you had to have a story. You had to have a big thing. Because if you didn't, you kind of, oh, well, I haven't really got a story. I just drifted in. But all of us, whether it's through an act of terrorism or whether it is just through stuff and life, forgiveness particularly is something that all of us have to deal with. And in our lives, whether it might not make a great headline, but in our lives, it's quite often a big thing. And so people that, I hope when they hear my story, it's like, actually, yeah, we can do this. Love is bigger. Forgiveness is possible. We can do this. And actually, you know, there is there is a thing at Coventry in the cathedral. It's called the Litany of Reconciliation, and it's a prayer that talks about the first line is the hatred that divides race from race, class from class, nation from nation. Father, forgive, and it lists all these different things, and it doesn't say Father, forgive them. It just says Father, forgive, which kind of includes all of us in that. And when we put when we put ourselves in this big messy kind of thing, we kind of think, yeah, we've really messed up, haven't we? Let's just together try and sort this out, which isn't always very easy. It's not very easy to look at somebody that's hurt you and say, right, come on, let's get together and sort this out, because you just want to go, rah. But actually, until, it's when we learn to do that that we kind of start making a difference in the world, I think.
I'm going to need to wrap this up. I've got one of your songs to play in a moment, but if people want to get hold of what you're doing at the moment, have you got a website? When are your next dates for your current tour?
So we've just about finished we've just about finished the sort of spring tour, and I've got a couple of festival things that I'm doing. I'm up at a place called Scargill House a lot of the summer, but we have got one in. I'm prepared. I've got it written down here. We've got one in the end of July in Hull. Gosh, you're going to ask me where it is, though. I don't know. It's in Hull somewhere.
On your
But then,
website.
yeah, it's all on the website. But then in the autumn, I've got a 16-day tour, but in October and November that takes me all over the place, Scotland, up to Scotland, down to London. So yeah, and everywhere in between. So
Cool. What's your website then for folk to come and find you?
it's robhalligan.co.uk.
Nice and simple. robhalligan.co.uk. Now, we're going to play a song. I'm going to crash the news and I don't care. So we've got this one off one of the CDs that we got from you a couple of weekends ago.
Yeah.
We write the stories. Just
Yeah.
give us a little bit of background on what this is that we're about to listen to.
So I went through a phase, just thinking about how each of our lives contains a story. There's a story, like I've already said, all of us have a story in our life, and it's when each day we live, we write a page or a chapter in that story, and each encounter we have affects that story. So it means that for instance, now I'm sort of involved in writing a bit of a chapter in your life because I'm talking to you. And so it's quite a good idea if we have that, if we realize that, just carry that responsibility that actually I want to write a good chapter. I want to write something good in their story. I want to influence their story for good. And just realizing that, I don't know, we're a kaleidoscope. This world, the song says this world is a kaleidoscope. And every color in that kaleidoscope needs the other colors to make it pop.
I like that. Would you like to introduce your own song then, if that's not too weird?
Yeah, I can do. Yeah. So this is We All Write the Stories, taken from my album, Always Heading Home, and I'm Rob Halligan, so do enjoy it.
Here at Pure 247 Radio, we've had the privilege of speaking to some amazing people with some amazing stories.
I was about 5k off the coast paddling, and I was watching this storm on the land, and it literally hit a mountain. And rather than just going over the top of it, just turned and just came straight at me. You can't stay on the board in that instance, so I literally am jumping off the back of the board. I've got everything tethered down on the board. I'm just holding on to the back of the board.
As I walked in, there was a fight going on the floor. There was a police sergeant sailing over the desk to help with restraining somebody. And the doors were clanging shut, all the big metal gates, and there were alarms going off and radios. And I felt this most enormous peace come over me, because I realised that this is where God wanted me to spend my career behind bars.
It was like a baptism of fire, and it was like the most socially deprived council wards in Britain. And then we were going into schools, and then kids were coming to the gigs, but then knocking on my door at night, and I was out there playing football till 11:30 p.m. at night, 12 o'clock, feeding kids, running youth clubs.
If you've missed an inspiring conversation and want to catch up, or you'd like to revisit a brilliant interview, you can. Our interviews are available on YouTube and podcast, so you can always catch up anytime you like. Search for Pure 247 Radio wherever you get your podcasts, or find our YouTube channel at Pure 247 Radio, or head over to www.pure247radio.org/catch up.